Hello again, this is my second video on this series of the EKG. In this video I will discuss the normal values of the different EKG waves, segments and intervals in terms of their duration and amplitude. Before we start, I would like to discuss the normal conduction system of the heart, because it's important to review this conduction system before we understand the heart waves and how they form. So this is the normal conduction system in our hearts. The conduction waves start in the SA node. The SA node is located in the right atrium near the entrance of the superior vena cava. You can see here the SA node as the green spot on the left upper corner of this picture. Then the wave will spread through the atria, causing atrial contraction, and all the waves then pass through a node in the center of the heart between the atria and the ventricle, called the atrioventricular node, before the wave can pass to the ventricle. And this is important because at this node there is a slowing of the wave to protect the ventricles. Then from the AV node, the wave will pass through a structure called the bundle of His. This bundle then divides into branches, the right and left bundle branch. The right bundle branch will pass into the right ventricle, and the left bundle branch will pass into the left ventricle and then divide into anterior and posterior fascicles. So the left branch is more complicated than the right one, and then the wave will pass into tiny fibers known as the Purkinje fibers. Now, the electrical recording we see on the EKG represents this journey of the electrical wave from the SA node down to the Purkinje fibers, and then followed by relaxation of the ventricles. So now let's see what we will see on an EKG paper. Now, the firing of the SA node, which starts the electrical activity in the heart, is not seen on the EKG paper. So the first deflection we are going to see will represent the atrial depolarization, and this is represented by the P wave. This is the normal P wave, which represents the atrial contraction, the atrial depolarization. The P wave is normally a positive deflection, except in lead AVR. This P wave represents the depolarization of both the right and the left atrium. Its normal duration is less than 3 small squares, which is about 0.12 seconds or 120 milliseconds, as you can see in this picture. The normal amplitude, i.e. the normal voltage, is 2.5 millimeters or 2.5 small squares. Okay, in this slide we can see that the P wave represents the right and left atrial depolarization. The first part of the wave represents the right atrium, because as I said, the SA node is located in the right atrium. So first we will see the right atrium, which will finish before the left atrium. So the second part of the wave represents the left atrium. We can imagine from this that abnormalities of the right atrium will result in changes in the amplitude of the P wave, while abnormalities of the left atrium will result in changes in the duration of the P wave. We will see this in a future video. Now, after the atrial contraction, the wave will pass into the AV node, and in the AV node there is a natural slowing of the wave to protect the ventricles, as I said earlier. This slowing is represented by a straight line on the EKG. This straight line is known as the PR segment. The PR segment is the pose from the end of atrial depolarization to the beginning of ventricular depolarization. In this picture, we see the PR interval. As I said in the previous video, an interval is the period from the beginning of one wave to the beginning of a second wave. This is the PR interval, and the PR interval represents the atrial depolarization plus the slowing in the AV node. Normally, this interval should be from 3 small squares to 5 small squares, i.e. from 0.12 seconds to 0.2 seconds. Okay, we can also here imagine that the PR interval will be prolonged in case we have an AV block, and will be shortened in case we have an accessory pathway bypassing the AV node, and we will see these abnormalities also in next videos. Now, after the AV node, the wave will pass into the bundle of His, and from the bundle of His it will pass into the right and left bundle branches to depolarize the ventricle. Ventricular depolarization is seen by the QRS complex on an EKG paper. This is our QRS complex. Now, the first negative deflection before the R wave is known as the Q wave. This Q wave represents the depolarization of the interventricular septum. This is not always seen on an EKG paper, but sometimes it does show, and it is the Q wave. Now, after the Q wave, we have a positive deflection known as the R wave. The R wave represents the ventricular depolarization, both the right and left ventricle, but mostly the left ventricle because it has a much larger muscle mass than the right ventricle. And then after the R wave, we have a small second negative deflection known as the S wave. So a negative deflection after the R wave is known as an S wave. Okay. Normal QRS interval should be less than 0.1 second, which represents 2.5 small squares. Now, I will discuss a normal phenomena about the QRS complex. This phenomena is seen on the chest leads. So if you take a look on the chest leads on a normal EKG paper, you will notice that the QRS complex in leads V1 and V2 is predominantly negative, i.e. it has a predominant S wave. And then in leads V3 and V4, it's rather biphasic. In lead 3 here, we can see that the R and S waves are equal, and in leads V5 and V6, it is a predominantly positive, i.e. it has a predominant R wave. This is normal phenomena. It is known as normal R progression. Normal R progression, i.e. in leads V1 and V2 we have a predominant S wave, and leads V3 and V4 the QRS is rather biphasic, and in leads V5 and V6 it is predominantly positive with a predominant R wave. It is important to remember this phenomena, as we will see it very frequently in the future. Now, after the end of ventricular depolarization, there is a small pause known as the ST segment, in which there is no electrical activity between ventricular depolarization and repolarization. This is the ST segment. After the ST segment, the ventricle will start to repolarize. Ventricular repolarization can be seen on the EKG paper, unlike the atrial repolarization. And ventricular repolarization is represented by the T wave. This is the T wave. You can see that ventricular repolarization is much slower than depolarization. It takes longer time, but the wave is simpler than the QRS complex. It is simple. T wave is normally about 1/3 to 2/3 in amplitude than the T wave is 1/3 to 2/3 the R wave, but it is liable to many changes, both cardiac and non-cardiac changes, as we will see in next videos. Thank you so much.